Chapter 3, Amarillo. I arrived in Amarillo in early 1966 and moved into the Downtowner Hotel, because that's where Carl Cox suggested I stay. What a culture shock Amarillo was. I spent my life in cities like Chicago and Detroit, where everything was open 24 hours, and where I could go to the movies after I came home from the matches. In Amarillo, the movie houses were only open on the weekends, and everything closed down at 8 p.m. Even the restaurants. I learned quickly that unless I bought food before I went to the matches, I wasn't going to eat that evening. And before I had time to fully deal with the culture, I was given another shocker. Dory Funk, Sr. wanted to name me Gay Gary Hart. "I want you to be a gorgeous George type of guy," he told me as my jaw dropped. "I want them to think you're a queer." "I'm Playboy Gary Hart from Chicago," I explained. "And I really don't want to present myself as a gay guy." Dory Sr. wouldn't budge, though. He wanted a gay wrestler on his roster and told me, "Well, your name is already Gay Gary Hart, and I'm not changing it, so you better come up with something." Now, it's not that I felt I was too manly to play a gay character or anything like that. It's just that I just didn't feel it was right to make fun of homosexuals. Actually, the heat getting. Gay gimmick wasn't a revolutionary concept in wrestling. There had been Gorgeous George, Handsome Johnny Barrett, Magnificent Maurice, and Ricky Starr before me, who had all done the stereotypical skipping and prancing around the ring, enraging the fans. Dory Sr. really wanted a character like that in Amarillo, so I had no choice but to acquiesce. So as per Dory Sr.'s wishes, I wore white trunks and boots with red hearts, and a pastel blue, red, and pink jacket. I dressed the part, but I didn't want to just swish around the ring and act like a gay guy. Instead, I wanted to come up with a unique twist for my character so I didn't have to rely on the same old gay stereotypes. I asked Dory Sr. if it would be alright if I gave a rose to the ugliest woman in the audience every night on my way to the ring, and Dory Sr. gave his approval. So every night, I would come out and find the biggest, fattest, ugliest woman in the arena, and I would present her with a rose and declare, "This is for the most beautiful woman in the state of Texas." That really infuriated the people. It also got my character away from the gay gimmick, and just made me more of a creep. However, no matter how hard I tried to steer my character in another direction, all the guys in the dressing room knew that the persona of Gay Gary Hart was supposed to be that of a queer, wanted nothing to do with me, and tried to avoid working with me. Dory Sr.'s two boys didn't have any choice, though, because they did whatever their father said. Therefore, I was immediately put in a program with Dory Funk Jr., and the first time I ever met his brother Terry was when I was wrestling junior at the Amarillo Fairgrounds. I knew that at some point in the match, Terry would jump in and attack me, but I had never met him because the heels and babyfaces had dressing rooms on either side of the building. I was pounding on Junior, when suddenly there was a roar from the crowd. I looked up, and there was Terry in the process of jumping over the top rope. He missed, caught his foot, and collapsed in the middle of the ring. Junior just looked at me and deadpan, "Meet my brother Terry." Eventually, I started a feud with Terry, and we got into a really hot program. During one of our matches at the Odessa Fairgrounds Coliseum, I busted Terry open pretty bad, and we took the match out of the ring and to the front of the building where the concession stands were. As Terry went out the front door, I started back to the dressing room. However, the fans had me trapped in the concession stand and weren't about to let me go. Thankfully, Professor Tanaka and Art Nelson came out to save me. Tanaka got about 40 stitches in his head from people hitting him with chairs, and Art got stabbed in his leg and back during the melee. They got me to the back, but once we were there, Art was really upset with me, screaming, "You stupid idiot. You could have gotten us killed. What were you doing fighting in the concession stand?" I started to apologize and explain that Terry and I just got carried away, but Art cut me off, saying, "This is serious business, kid. You could have gotten killed. If it hadn't have been for Tanaka and I, what do you think would have happened to you? You have to learn how to gauge your heat." Not only did Art save my life that night, but he taught me a valuable lesson, as well. Dory Sr. eventually put me and Art together as a tag team, but Art wasn't too thrilled to have Gay Gary Hart as his partner. Aside from not liking my gimmick, I'm sure he was still upset at me for the time he had to save me in Odessa, so he treated me like I didn't exist, and generally wasn't very nice to me. One night in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Art and I were in a 2/3 falls match against the Funk Brothers. We went to a 15-minute draw the first round, and I never went over and tagged Art in. I really didn't think anything about it, it just never entered my mind. Before the second round, I asked Art if he wanted to start. Art assured me, "No, kid, you're doing fine. Go ahead." After wrestling for about 3 minutes, Gary Jr. told me to tag Art in. I went to my corner and held out my hand, but Art wouldn't tag in, insisting, "You're doing fine, kid. You don't need me." I went back to Jr. and mouthed, "He won't tag me." Jr. looked concerned and tagged Terry in, who whispered, "What's the matter? Is Art mad at us?" Nobody in their right mind wanted Art Nelson to be mad at them, because he was a real tough guy. I dropped the second fall, and before the third round, I asked Art, "Do you want to start?" Once again, he shook his head and said, "You're doing just fine. I'm enjoying myself right here in the corner." I worked the third round and took that fall, as well. When we got to the dressing room, Art wouldn't look at me. That wasn't unusual, though, because he never looked at me. A few weeks later, we were booked in Lubbock against the Funk Brothers. I asked Art who he would like to start the match, and he replied, "Well, in the last match we had against them you started. So I think you should start again." Once again, I started the match, and after a few minutes I went to the corner and tagged Art in. Art went around a couple of times with Jr. and Terry, and then tagged me in. I went around for about 3 minutes and tagged Art, and as I did, he grinned at me and said, "Now you're learning how to be a tag team wrestler." At that moment it clicked in my head why he was so mad at me. He thought I had tried to steal the show and hog the first round in Albuquerque. After that match in Lubbock, things definitely improved between us, although I wouldn't say that Art and I became friendly, because he really disliked my gay Gary Hart gimmick, as did most of the guys in the dressing room. I have to say that Gory Guerrero was great, though. He realized that no one wanted to work with me, stepped right up to the plate, gave me some of the greatest matches I ever had in my life, and really boosted my confidence. He was a wonderful guy, and I appreciated the time I got to spend with him and the good matches he gave me. Danny Miller, on the other hand, offered me nothing but abuse. He looked down on me and couldn't figure out why I was getting a push while he was toiling away on the middle of the card. He and I were programmed in a series of matches, and I guess he resented wrestling gay Gary Hart, because during our matches he would stretch me and cackle, "Hey, kid, how does this feel?" One time we were in Colorado City, and he was stretching me beyond belief. My left hand was free, so I shoved my index finger in his belly button as far as I could, and he screamed like a girl. I wasn't a shooter, but I could bite, kick, and hit, and if there was an orifice, I would go for it. Every time I saw him after that I would hold up my finger and taunt. How did that feel? He had nothing to say to me and never bothered me again. The trips in Amarillo were long and horrific, up to 400 miles each way. I mostly traveled with Dick Murdoch, though he wasn't wrestling at the time. He was just a 19-year-old kid, and was known as a second, wherein he would sit at the timekeeper's table and watch our backs. If anybody tried to jump a wrestler or sucker punch us, Dick would knock them out. He was our security, and I saw him knock out lots of people. His father, the fabulous Texan Frankie Hill Murdoch, had been a wrestler in the territory for a long time, but by the time I was there he was quite ill with emphysema and just served as a referee. To entertain ourselves during our travels, Dick taught me how to shoot jackrabbits out of the car. We both had guns, and as we traveled down the highway, if we spotted a jackrabbit, we would open fire. During my time in Amarillo, Dick and I must have killed thousands of jackrabbits. I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't any jackrabbits in West Texas anymore, because it feels like we killed them all. The young guys in the territory were Dory Jr., Terry, Dick, and I. Everyone else was 40 or older, so the four of us bonded really quickly. Dick and the Funk Brothers were very close. It's funny, because even though Dick Murdoch never went to West Texas State University with them, he was looked at like the school mascot, and it eventually became like kayfabe, and nobody would admit that Dick didn't go to there, because he was so loved and respected by everyone. When it comes to the Funks, Terry and I have always been closer than Junior and I. As much as I love Junior, he can be kind of aloof and is not real easy to become chummy with. So even though I do consider Junior a friend, Terry and I have always been a perfect match. Even though Terry and I were in a program and weren't supposed to travel together, sometimes we had no choice. One time Terry and I wrestled each other in the opening match in Hereford at 7:30 p.m., and then we had to get ourselves to Plainview so we could wrestle in the main event. It was dark when we left the arena in Hereford, and all of the fans were inside the auditorium in Plainview, so we threw caution to the wind and traveled together. Most nights, Dick and I would secretly meet up with Terry after the matches, and we would ride the oil wells. We would bring some beer, crawl up the head of an oil well, settle ourselves on the pump, and ride the oil well while we drank our beer, talked about life, and shot at jackrabbits. One night, Terry and I drove out to the desert to shoot some jackrabbits. We fell asleep in the car, and when we woke up the next day, we realized there had been a hellacious rainstorm. Because we were in the desert. We were basically stuck on an island, and it took until 4 p.m. until the water ran off and we could drive out of there. Everyone was worried about us because no one knew where we were. I had a lot of great times with Terry. Jack Pfeffer left Chicago and came into Amarillo for a while. He was in charge of the female wrestlers and brought them into work for Dory Sr. I had a low opinion of him because of what Billy Goals told me, so Terry and I went out of our way to aggravate him. For example, we would flirt with his girl wrestlers, which would make Jack go crazy. Jack was an odd character who had all these weird rules, like declaring no one could whistle in his presence, and insisting that no one should put their hat on a bed. During my stay, Dory Sr. came up with a finishing maneuver for me, eye claw. He instructed me to grab hold of my opponent's eye and not let go. Then he would have my opponent sandpaper their eye, so the next time the fans would see them, it looked horrific. Dory Sr. even asked if I would cut my fingers when I was applying the cloth so blood would run into my opponent's eyes and make for a dramatic effect. Of course I did it, but the only bad thing was that whenever I ate popcorn or potato chips, my fingers always burned. That hold really got me over as a maniac, though, because it seemed like I didn't care if I was disqualified or not. I was just out there to hurt somebody. At the time, Fritz von Erich was a major figure in wrestling based out of Dallas. He invented the head claw and rocked the wrestling world with it, headlining Buffalo, Cleveland, Toronto, and Detroit, which is where I first met him. Dory Sr. brought him in to wrestle me for a series of claw versus claw matches, and we did good business. Fritz remembered me from Detroit and saw firsthand what I had done for Jim Meyer's career, so he asked if I would ever consider coming into the Dallas territory to manage and develop talent. Even though Dory Sr. was giving me a good opportunity to be a wrestler, I knew I would never be a Buddy Rogers or a Johnny Valentine. I was also getting tired of West Texas because there was nothing to do there but shoot jackrabbits. Dallas, on the other hand, was a major city. It sounded like a good deal, and when Fritz assured me that I could come in as Playboy Gary Hart, I was sold. When I told Dory Sr. I was going to Dallas, he tried to talk me out of leaving Amarillo by encouraging me to focus on my wrestling career. I explained to him that even though I loved wrestling for him and enjoyed my matches with his sons, I had a burning desire to develop talent, and I really didn't like the persona of gay Gary Hart. Dory Sr. understood, and couldn't have been nicer, assuring me that if things didn't work out in Dallas, I would be welcome back in Amarillo. He then added, "Do me a favor, and every now and then when you're on Dallas TV, mention my boys." Of course I promised him I would, knowing it could only help me on interviews to brag about how I beat up the Funk brothers in Amarillo. I was very appreciative of the opportunity Dory Funk Sr. gave me. Even though he wouldn't let me manage and develop guys the way I wanted to, he showed me I was valuable and paid me very well. He was a dynamic guy and every wrestler who ever worked for him would have cut their head off for him, and I was no different. We all loved him, yet we were afraid of him, too, because he was so tough. I may have been a street kid who hung out with gangsters, but he was the real deal. I know because I wrestled him. I was unbelievably fortunate, because for the third time in my career, and in just the third territory I had been in, I had found yet another great mentor. Billy Goals, Bert Ruby, and Dory Funk Sr. really deserve a lot of credit for getting me ready to be able to handle myself in the business, and for my future success. And as grateful as I was to be working for Dory Funk Sr., I knew it was time for me to move on.